The Winnipeg Jets are back in first place in the Central after a massive win over the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Jets weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. After getting outplayed for 2 periods, the Jets woke up and decided, well, it's Harlem Globetrotters time. We'll break this game down and all of the fun stuff on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON NHL or Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. That is a great way to save money, and you know what? We'll talk about why it can save you time as well when it comes to buying your favorite concert and event tickets. Now, like I said, the Jets had a very big game today, a home game after a really emotional and very physical weekend against the Minnesota Wild. If we're talking about series that, quite frankly, could be a preview of some coming attractions in the playoffs, maybe this one is it. Obviously, the Wild have a lot of work to do to make up ground and get into the postseason, but I'll tell you what, right? They are tenacious, they are angry, and while they're not particularly great, they have enough energy and physicality with, a healthy Gustafsson in net kind of backstopping the rest to be a real pain, right? We saw in that series, Winnipeg basically outmuscled a very physical Wild team, which is actually really impressive when you think about it, because I don't think the Jets necessarily tried to play to their level. I just think the Jets took their game plan and elevated it in a way that the Jets kind of matched to their skill and style. So a massive series win, obviously, and that led to, expectations for the next couple of weeks, right? The Jets have one of the easier schedules among a lot of teams out there right now, starting with this Tampa Bay game for the next few weeks. Now, Tampa Bay is not an easy game. That, I think, is very clear. The Lightning, look, they're not as good as they used to be, but this team still has a super lethal power play, and you really can't count out Stamkos, Point, or Kucherov not to have some sort of an impact. Now, I will say that they did have 5 defenders instead of 6, thanks to injuries and stuff, but, at the end of the day, still a very tough opponent. No matter how battered or beat up this team is, they just are not a squad that you can really give a lot of time and space to. And we saw that very early when the Jets ended up taking a bit of a phantom penalty. This one was a high stick, but it was actually, I think, Myers who had this one. He high sticked himself or whatever. It is what it is. The reffing over the past, couple of months has been atrocious, as always, but it definitely feels like the officiating was just on a different page from what we were watching in this game. There were lots of calls that didn't really make sense, and obviously some stuff that wasn't called, and some of the actual penalty calls were just honestly laughable for both sides. So, yeah, officiating, not great. And it's especially worrying when you have a bad officiating night, because then the Lightning start getting power plays, and that is where they are most dangerous. Like, at even strength, this Lightning team doesn't really have a lot of elite firepower like it used to. Up top, in like the top 6, sure. Once you start going down the lines, though, it definitely thins out pretty quickly. And I feel like, comparatively speaking, this is one of the weaker Lightning rosters we've seen in the past several years. But all that said, the power play is not one that you can take lightly, and almost immediately they had a tic-tac goal moment with Stamkos. That was a brilliant finish. Not much Hellebuck could do, and it did kind of set the tone early that, okay, even if, we can quibble with the penalty call there, you just want to stay off the PK as much as humanly possible. So don't give the Lightning free passes, and that was a theme throughout the entire night. Now, for the first period and a half or so, maybe even first 2 periods, the Jets kind of got outplayed, right? Winnipeg was not that great, It felt like the Lightning were better in the corners. They won second chance opportunities, and when they created dangerous chances off the rebounds, they were able to get really close to pouncing on a few of them. Thankfully for the Jets, the Lightning didn't actually convert on a lot of their best opportunities, and Hellebuck was really sharp on so many other chances. I think he was actually awarded first star of the evening, so a big game from him. His save percentage on the season is up to a 919, so don't look now, but you are starting to see your Vezina favorite really take flight. Now, as far as what actually transpired in other parts of the game, I really felt like this was a time when a lot of the depth players really stepped up. Guys who maybe have had, inconsistent starts to the season, but, in critical moments, right, we had a Brendan Dillon to Neil Pionk tying goal, which was really funny. Wouldn't really expect to see that, right? But, Pionk had just had a really bad turnover the moment before. And, with that kind of being the situation, you're like, okay, what's going to happen, right? Is it going to be one of these games where Pionk gives up an easy goal and suddenly we're in the hole? But then Pionk avenged his own turnover and tipped home a Dillon point shot about a minute or two later. So really great to see that. Pionk, he does kind of give at both ends of the ice, but it's always nice when it only ends up in one of those nets and it's the opponent, right? So happy days. Things got even better because the Perfetti line, which was really just absolutely all over the place this evening, cashed in on a great chance. Perfetti set up a slot area opportunity by dangling through some defenders, but more importantly, and this is something that's really underrated about Perfetti, and we'll talk about other stuff with him this season, but just in this instance, right, I really want to focus on his tenacity and grit. He really fought for the second chance opportunities. He allowed Iafallo to kind of get into a dangerous shooting position and Nemestikov offering a little more support. And it was his persistence on the puck that created a nice little rebound opportunity. Iafallo punched home a goal. It was a little bit against the run of play, but, the Jets were occasionally flashing some dangerous counters and stuff. They still had to, kind of piece together a more consistent, I would say 20 minutes, but you were seeing signs that they were starting to really push in and start to wake up. And on this chance, it was kind of like, okay, Jets are starting to feel it. What are we going to see in the remainder of the game? And for the third period, the Jets pretty much just paddled the Lightning. I was about to say the Wild, which they did earlier in the weekend, but yeah. Winnipeg basically controlled the entire final 20 minutes. We got goals from Ehlers and then an empty netter from, Morgan Barron, thanks to a nice little chipped pass from Toninato. His 4th point in 4 games, by the way. But yeah, quietly at Nemestikov 3-point night, he was everywhere and was a real force. I also really liked how well the Perfetti line played. It was just super dominant. The only thing that was really bad was the first line for a lot of the game. They just seemed like a step slow, and it was honestly their first bad game, like legitimately bad game, since they've been united. So I expect it's just a brief road bump. I think part of it was John Cooper really forcing isolation in certain areas and forcing positioning from certain skaters like Ehlers. He took a lot of their best passes away in the way that he had his defenders position, and it definitely made life very difficult for the top line. But it also made a lot of the other lines open up and get more scoring opportunities. So because they had the hard match against the top line, it opened up so much more for everyone else to really thrive. And in a way, you could argue maybe the top line was the sacrificial lamb in this game. I thought that they would play better, but it is what it is, right? You're going to have off games, and this was their first one where they just legitimately got outplayed. So a lot to like in this game, a massive win, and the Jets are back in first place. Now, I do want to talk about some really top-end performances from the middle and bottom six, because I feel like we're really seeing our depth guys step up in ways that we haven't always had in previous years. We'll talk about who's really impressed me recently and what I hope to see from them in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets and stuff, everyone knows that, whether it's concerts or sporting events, tickets are expensive and they're not always easy to come by. Gametime knows your pain. They have dealt through, all of the same sort of surprise charges and stuff. They know how much it can be a pain to buy tickets, and they want to make and streamline the process as easy as humanly possible. They offer killer last-minute deals, flash sales, and in-venue arena views, so you know what you're actually paying for, right? You don't want to have a nasty surprise of a giant pillar or something blocking your view. Gametime gets it. They have made it easier than ever with their super safe, very secure, and very convenient app. And they also offer a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episode as we are talking about a lot of players who I feel have really stepped up recently for Winnipeg. Guys that don't get a lot of credit, perhaps, but have really impressed me either since their recall or just in general. Now, before we talk about who's really stood out, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at, not actually our friends, ourselves. We've launched a really cool thing. The Locked On Network has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. You won't want to miss a minute, I promise you. Now, circling back to the Jets, right, I just said that, a lot of depth guys or players who are perhaps not our superstars have really elevated their games and stepped up in a really prominent way. Now, the first guy, and this is going to sound funny because he's played a lot recently, but the first guy that I want to shout out is going to be Vladislav Namestnikov. Now, Namestnikov, when he was acquired last year, I was kind of like, okay, for like a second or a third round pick or something, pretty modest. Maybe it was even lower. I remember whatever it was super cheap. And immediately he slotted in as like a quality middle six center, looked like a guy who could potentially play okay with like Ehlers on the second line, but maybe wasn't the most optimal fit. And then, this season, I feel like he's elevated his game and become a really integral force to this team. Now, ideally, I think he would make sense as like your third line center. But in the role that he's been given on the second line, which actually, based on deployments, you could argue is the third line, he's really fit in quite nicely alongside Perfetti and whoever else gets attached to his hip at that time. Right now, it's Iafallo. And Alex, I think, has actually played some of his best hockey in a Jets uniform since joining this line a couple of games ago. But, overall, right, Namestnikov, I really feel, has done a great job of anchoring this kind of like middle rotational unit. And you can kind of move him up and down as need be. He had a brief shift with Velarde and Ehlers that ended up resulting in a goal in the third period in the Tampa Bay game. So, hats off to him, a hat trick of assists. I loved, the fact that he just continues to fight on every shift. He's a very persistent player. He's very gritty, but he's skilled enough to make plays and passes. And, he actually gets himself in pretty good scoring positions. I think the only downside with him is that sometimes his puck handling or offensive instincts aren't quite as polished as you might ask for from like a top six player. But in the role that he's performed and how he's done so far, I feel like he's done a really admirable job, and I've been very impressed with him this season. I've also got to give some props to Toninato and Janssen Fjallby. Toninato has spent a lot less time, but obviously in the few games that he's been called up, he's been really noticeable. I've really been impressed with his positioning and, offensive awareness in the slot. He's gotten himself into good positions. He's, again, a hard worker on every shift. You really don't see him taking strides off. And again, he doesn't play a lot, but in the minutes that he's played, he's been very impactful and noticeable, which is about all I could ask for. A fourth line that creates offensive chances, occasionally cashes in, and, promotes good defensive awareness and discipline. That's all I really ask for. And he's done that in spades. 4 points in 4 games. He looks almost unbenchable right now. And that's pretty much all you could ask for from a guy who wasn't really, I think, expected to be an impact player this year. Maybe a guy who comes in for some injury replacements, but, he wasn't looking like a top six or even like middle six option. He just looked like a guy who was perhaps on the fringes of the amount of talent that we have right now, especially in the depth ranks. This is, again, the deepest Jets team we've had in many seasons. And, Toninato didn't really seem like much more of a fringe player, or more than a fringe player. And the same can be said for Janssen Fjallby. Coming into this year, AJF kind of looked like a guy who, again, was maybe an injury call-up, but didn't really seem like a player that would play a pivotal role and actually start stealing minutes from others. But he's been so good and effective at being a very direct, very straightforward, but surprisingly dangerous player who is right now playing with house money and confidence. You start to talk about not really wanting to bench him. Even when guys get healthy, he's been legitimately great in this role. So, the Jets have a lot of hard decisions. I've talked about it on a previous episode, but again, I think guys really deserve their due. Now, on the defensive side, I want to shout out a couple of guys who are maybe a little bit on the more unsung hero side. One has to be Dylan DeMello. He has continued to anchor the first pair alongside Morrissey, and he's done a really good job, right? Every game that you see DeMello, he'll have moments where he maybe has a defensive lapse, he might misplay something, and you see his lack of foot speed can be a little bit of an issue once in a while, but the body of work with him, his shot blocking, his lane shutdowns, his defensive awareness, his positioning along the walls, he's so good at everything else that the few blemishes that he has, you really are more than okay with excusing. He's been a great defensive partner for Morrissey. That pairing has been really, really effective in what they've been asked to do. Morrissey this year continues to just take on more responsibility, and DeMello is the guy who's kind of his safety valve, but also isn't afraid to jump into the rush and contribute offensively if he has to. So DeMello, again, really unsung and really impressed with him. Also going to shout out Dylan Sandberg. Sandberg has continued to be a beautiful second pairing defender. He has been a defensive rock for Winnipeg. And while, right now Dylan and Pionk are technically the second pair, I think longer term Sandberg is the guy who's going to succeed Dylan and become that number two pairing shutdown player, but he's also good enough on the puck that you don't have to worry about him not contributing anything at the other end of the ice. But Dylan, Sam, well, I guess I can't really say Dylan because, there's multiple Dylans on this team. There's three of them. But for Sandberg, right, obviously this has been a great season for him. He, I'm sure, was very bitter with himself at the mistake last year that was kind of unlucky that, ended the playoff series. But I mean, we all sort of knew that, Vegas was just better. They went on to win the cup, and you really couldn't hold it against the kid for like one small lapse that was honestly just poor luck. So glad to see that did not shake his confidence because he looks fantastic. He's a guy that I'm eager to lock up long-term in a short bit, but for the time that we get to enjoy him, let's hope that Sandberg keeps up his steady performance. Now, one player I really want to spend some time talking about, I've talked about him a lot this year, but I think it really is worth shouting out just how impressive Cole Perfetti is, especially in a game like this against Tampa Bay where he went ham. We'll talk about what makes him so special and why he's really on the verge of superstardom for this Jets team in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. You don't have to worry about whether your team wins or loses, which for you Vikings fans might be a little bit of a help. I know the past couple of weeks have been a little turbulent. As a Ravens fan, I don't even have to worry because Baltimore just tends to win most of their games, and I suppose for me it's okay. But for a lot of you who maybe have slightly struggling teams this year, having that guaranteed $150 in bonus bets with that $5 moneyline bet really couldn't be better. FanDuel, of course, is always easy to use. It's safe, secure, and they offer tons of different betting categories. They've also got live same-game parlays. They've got new bets under the Explorer tab. And, of course, they have a parlay hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays and makes it super convenient. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's closing thoughts as we wrap up really quickly with some final thoughts about a particular player that I've really been impressed with. I know that I've talked about Cole Perfetti, and you're probably like, oh, we got to slow down on the Perfetti praise. But you know what? We're not stopping this train. Perfetti has been phenomenal for the Jets this year. He's really come into his own, and I think it's only a matter of time before we start talking about him as legitimately a burgeoning Jets superstar. He's recorded multiple points over the past few games. He's not far away from a point per game. He's 24 out of 36. And you have to remember, he's really not played, all that much, relatively speaking, this year. He's logging a little under 14 minutes or under 15 minutes this season, which really, for me, isn't enough. I think you need to pump those numbers up. It's actually less than he had last year, albeit, he had a smaller sample size, but Cole is just a guy who instantly seems to improve every line that he's been on. And with how good he's been offensively and his surprisingly underrated defensive impact, I really feel like I would want to see more from him. This game against the Lightning, he actually had nearly 17 minutes, which is, I don't think it's the most he's played. I think he's had bigger games where, somebody got hurt and he's had to log more shifts. But overall, right, Perfetti continues to be a really dynamic force, and I think we're seeing more and more offensive confidence and awareness from him when it comes to being more of like an off-the-puck attacker. He's had a couple of shifts I've noticed recently where he'll be a trailing skater and he just sort of glides into position. Somebody finds him for what should be a bang-bang tap-in, but, were it not for either just a bare miss or, a straight-up robbery from a goaltender, Perfetti could probably have another 5 or so goals. He's been brilliant down low. He's great along the walls. In space, he's an absolute menace. He's got the vision and patience and skill to make passes that nobody else on this team can even visualize. And I've really enjoyed watching him blossom into a guy who I really do feel, is one of our future superstars. And, what really impresses me is that defensively, he plays all three zones so effectively. In the defensive zone, he'll try and shut down lanes. Sometimes he puts his body on the line to my great dismay at times. I don't mind blocking shots, but with Perfetti, you really don't want him to get hurt. He is one of our most skilled attackers and the guy that is kind of becoming like the Ehlers 2.0 in terms of how much he can shape the effectiveness of his line. But, the other thing with him is that when it comes to like the neutral zone and stuff, he'll head off plays really smartly. He knows how to back check effectively, even though he's not got a crazy top end motor. He seems to anticipate plays really well. He'll jump those skating lanes and honestly pick off passes or force turnovers off of guys already in possession really effectively. And when he's in the offensive zone, he'll add even more physicality and really grind along the walls to try and force stuff. Now, of course, like any player, he'll have a couple of turnovers here and there that are signs that he's still a young, growing, skilled player who occasionally forces something once in a while. But overall, the sample size with Perfetti this year has been amazing. And I really feel like, given how little he's actually playing, on the whole, the fact that he's already got 24 points and is on pace for, a little bit shy of 60 points this year, or maybe around 60 points, is really, really impressive. There's not many players in this league who could really claim to do something like that with as limited ice time as Perfetti is getting. So for Bones, I think that's one adjustment that would be really easy. Just add more Perfetti. I really feel like that's all I've got to say. Play him more and also move him back to the top power play unit. Iafallo is trying to hold his own as much as possible, but it's just clear that role down the slot area isn't really working for him as well as we'd expect, right? Iafallo's been great on the second line at even strength, but on the power play, it's a bit of a mismatch. So bring Perfetti back, swap them again, and, profit. Perfetti, I just feel like makes, the top power play unit even just a little bit more dangerous, if nothing else. But I think his skill and vision and passing ability just makes him the kind of guy who could easily play a really effective bumper role. But the Jets are going to Jets. So far, that's worked out really well for them, but maybe they could stand to get even better, which should honestly terrify the league. The fact that this team is still not in its final form yet should make a lot of people very scared because we're a top 5 team in the league right now, currently in 3rd place, and this Jets team can only get better from here. So let me know what you think of this game against the Lightning, what impressed you, who stood out. Drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with some preview of Winnipeg's upcoming California trip and what should be a very fun test on the road. But like I said, that's it for tonight. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.